I was in my early 20s and living 2 hours away from my family because of work. That Christmas Eve, I finished my shift late and decided to take the commuter train home instead of driving. The weather was really bad. There was freezing rain earlier in the day that had turned the roads into a mess, and I figured the train would be safer than trying to drive. It was supposed to be simple, but obviously, I wouldn't be writing this if that was the case. The station was almost empty when I arrived. A handful of people stood scattered along the platform, all bundled up and quiet. Christmas decorations were still up, plastic wreaths were zip-tied to the railings, and a string of lights flickered near the ticket machine. It made the place feel abandoned instead of festive. I checked the board. I was on the last train for the night. That alone should have been enough to make me uneasy. When the train pulled in, only 3 cars opened for boarding. I stepped into the middle one and sat near the back, dropping into a window seat. There were maybe 8 other passengers in the entire car. Across from me sat a man in a heavy coat, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He wasn't on his phone or looking out the window. He was just staring straight ahead. A woman with a gift bag leaned her head against the glass, already half asleep. The doors closed, and the train began moving. I relaxed a little bit. About 10 minutes into the ride, the conductor walked through, scanning tickets. Everything felt normal until we passed the second stop. The train didn't slow down. Someone near the front called out, and the conductor didn't answer. The train just kept going. I checked my phone. There was little service. Not unusual for that stretch, but still uncomfortable. The man across from me shifted for the first time. He glanced toward the doors, then down the aisle, like he was counting people. The overhead speaker crackled. "Attention passengers," the conductor said. His voice sounded strained, not quite panicked, but tight. "Due to an issue ahead, this train will be making an unscheduled stop. Please remain seated." No one spoke. The woman with the gift bag lifted her head and frowned. The train slowed and eventually stopped. Not at a station, but between stops, surrounded by trees and darkness. Outside the window, nothing moved. After a minute, the doors at the front of the car opened. Cold air rushed in. 2 men in dark jackets stepped inside. No uniforms or badges, just jeans, boots, and gloves. One of them said, "We're checking tickets again." The conductor stood behind them, pale, eyes fixed on the door. Something about the way the men moved. They were calm and confident. They weren't rushing or aggressive. They were just deliberate. They walked slowly down the aisle, stopping at random passengers, asking to see tickets again. When they reached the woman with the gift bag, one of them asked, "Where are you headed tonight?" She hesitated. Home." He nodded. "Family waiting?" "Yes," she said quickly. "Good," he replied, and moved on. When they reached me, the taller one leaned slightly closer than necessary. "Where are you going?" he asked. I told him the town name. He glanced at the ticket, then at me. "Is anyone expecting you?" "Yes," I said. I didn't add anything else. He held my ticket for a second too long, then handed it back. "All right," he said. "Sit tight." They continued down the aisle. I noticed something then. They weren't checking everyone. They were skipping people. Specifically, they skipped the man who had been sitting across from me. He didn't look surprised. The men reached the back of the car and spoke quietly to the conductor. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw the conductor shake his head. One of the men smiled. Not friendly, not threatening either, just thin. They turned around and walked back toward the open doors. Before stepping off, one of them looked down the aisle and said, "Merry Christmas, everyone." The doors closed, and the train sat still for another minute before moving again. No one spoke until we reached the next station. When the doors opened at the next stop, the woman with the gift bag stood up and walked off quickly. I stayed seated, still trying to process what had happened. That's when I noticed the seat across from me was empty. The man who had been sitting there, the one they skipped, was gone. I hadn't seen him stand up. I asked the guy in the aisle if he had seen where he went. He shook his head. I thought he got off earlier. When we finally reached my stop, there were police cars waiting at the platform. Officers boarded immediately and asked everyone to stay put. They pulled the conductor aside. After a while, one officer came down the aisle and asked if anyone noticed a man in a gray coat leave the train earlier. I raised my hand and told him where the man had been sitting. The officer nodded grimly. Later, I learned what happened. The train had been stopped because authorities were searching for a suspect who had been approaching people traveling alone on Christmas Eve and following them home from transit stops. The two men who boarded weren't random. They were plainclothes officers. The man across from me had been their target. They didn't arrest him because he hadn't done anything yet. I made it home that night, hugged my family, and tried to forget the ride. But every Christmas Eve now, when the station's empty and people rush home, I think about that man counting passengers. I plowed snow for the county for 3 winters after high school. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well and didn't require much talking, which I liked. That, of course, meant the possibility of working during the holidays. The roads were usually quiet on holidays anyways. Most people stayed off the roads unless they absolutely had to. One year, it snowed on Christmas Eve night. That Christmas morning, I was assigned the early shift, 4 a.m. to noon, clearing secondary roads and rural connectors. The kind of roads that don't see traffic unless someone lives out there. It was still dark when I started. The road I was on cut through farmland and patches of woods for about 12 miles. No businesses, just scattered houses and long stretches of nothing. Snow had fallen steadily overnight. Not a blizzard, just enough to make everything look buried and soundless. My plow lights lit up the road in a narrow tunnel, the rest swallowed by darkness. Around 6 a.m., as the sky started to lighten slightly, I noticed a vehicle parked on the shoulder. That alone wasn't unusual. What caught my attention was where it was parked. There were no driveways nearby or intersections. Just a sedan pulled halfway into the ditch with the hazard lights off. I slowed and pulled ahead of it, stopping a few yards up the road. Protocol said to check on stalled vehicles, especially in cold weather. I stepped out with my boots crunching through snow. The car was empty. The driver's door was closed. No frost on the windshield either, suggesting it had been running recently. No footprints leading away from it either. I leaned in and looked through the glass. The keys were still in the ignition. As I straightened up, I noticed something farther down the road. A figure walking along the tree line. Not on the road, not toward the car, but parallel to it. I called out, "Hey, are you alright?" The figure stopped. Even from a distance, I could tell it was a man. He had a heavy coat with the hood pulled up. He didn't answer. Instead, he changed direction, cutting across the snow toward the woods. That didn't sit right with me. I radioed it in just so that they could be aware of it. Dispatch acknowledged and told me to continue plowing while a deputy headed my way. I got back into the truck and started moving forward again, keeping the car in my mirrors. About a half a mile down, I came to a long bend where the road narrowed. That's where I saw him again, standing right in the middle of the road. I slowed to a stop, heart thumping harder than it should have been. He didn't step aside. I cracked the window and said, "Are you the one with the car back there?" He stared at the plow blade instead of me. "Is anyone else out today?" he asked. "Just me," I said, "and a deputy on the way." That was a mistake. His jaw tightened slightly. He looked past me, down the road behind my truck. Then he stepped to the side. "Go ahead," he said. I didn't argue. I drove another mile before pulling over again and waiting with my truck idling. My hands were sweaty inside my gloves. A few minutes later, the deputy radioed me. They'd found the car. It belonged to a man reported missing early that morning. His family said he left home angry after an argument. The deputy paused, then asked me to describe the man I'd seen. When I finished, he went quiet. They found the man about an hour later, deep in the woods off the same road I had been on. He'd parked the car deliberately and walked away from it, trying to reach a farmhouse he believed was occupied. He'd been checking roads and watching for traffic. Something about the entire situation was just off. I finished my route and went home just before noon. My family was already up and starting to unwrap the gifts around the tree. They asked me how work was. I just said, quiet. But later, when I looked out the window and saw the snow-covered street, empty and peaceful, I thought about how things that morning could have gone. If I'd stopped longer, if I offered him a ride, if I hadn't mentioned the deputy, who knows exactly what would have happened. Every Christmas morning, after gifts and breakfast, my dad used to take a walk around the neighborhood. He said it helped him feel normal after all the noise and chaos. As I got older, I started going with him. That year, I was home from college, and Christmas Day felt unusually warm for December. Snow from earlier in the week had melted into slush along the curbs. Most people were inside, with the houses glowing softly with lights. It felt peaceful. Almost too peaceful. We left the house around 10 a.m., bundled up but not in any rush. Our neighborhood was a loop. The streets were quiet. It was a typical suburban neighborhood. About halfway through, my dad waved to a man standing in his driveway a few houses down. The man waved back. "New neighbor?" I asked. My dad shrugged. "Maybe visiting family." The man was tall, wearing a dark winter jacket and gloves. He stood next to a sedan with his trunk open, like he was unloading something, but I couldn't see anything inside. As we passed, he smiled and said, "Merry Christmas." We said it back and kept walking. 2 blocks later, I noticed the same man again. This time, he was standing at the corner near the mailbox cluster, pretending to read a flyer taped to the post. His car was parked along the curb behind him. It was a different street, but I recognized the same sedan. I slowed slightly. "Dad?" He followed my gaze. His smile faded for a second. "Probably just walking too," he said. The man glanced up and smiled back again, quick and automatic, then looked back down toward the paper. We turned the corner. A few minutes later, footsteps sounded behind us. Not fast or slow, just close enough to notice. The man spoke from behind. "Nice day for a walk." My dad turned. "It sure is." The man nodded. "Quiet too. Most people stay inside today." "That's true," my dad said. The man looked at me. "Do you both live around here?" "Yes," I said. He smiled wider. "I thought so." Then he asked something that didn't quite make sense. "Do people usually have company over on Christmas?" My dad answered without thinking. "Most do." The man nodded slowly. "Good to know." He stopped walking but watched us continue down the street. I glanced back once and saw him pull out his phone, tapping something with his gloved thumb. When we reached the end of the loop, my dad stopped. "Let's head back a different way," he said. This wasn't like him. We took a longer route, passing behind the elementary school and cutting through a side street. Halfway down, we saw the sedan again. As we passed another house, a woman stepped outside holding a trash bag. She looked annoyed but not scared. "Did you see that guy?" she asked. My dad stopped. "Which guy?" "The one asking questions," she said. "He said he was checking in on people and wanted to know who was home." My stomach tightened. "Did you call anyone?" I asked. She shook her head. "I didn't think it was worth it. He wasn't really doing anything." Behind us, I heard a car door close. We turned and saw the man standing by the sedan again, watching us openly now. He didn't smile this time. My dad said calmly, "We're heading home." The man nodded. He stepped back toward his car and opened the trunk again. Still empty, it looked like, at least. As we walked away, he called out, "Enjoy the rest of your day." The tone wasn't friendly, it sounded more like a conclusion. About 40 minutes later, as we were cleaning up wrapping paper, my phone buzzed with a neighborhood alert. Suspicious individual reported. Residents advised to remain indoors. Multiple people had called about a man knocking on doors. He was asking who was living there, who was visiting, and when people would be leaving for the afternoon. Police were able to locate the sedan 2 streets over. Inside the car were printed maps of the neighborhood with handwritten notes beside several addresses. Our street was circled. They never charged him with anything serious, trespassing at the most. He claimed he was checking on elderly relatives and got confused. But later that week, my dad pointed something out. That guy never asked for help, he said. Never asked for directions or never asked for anything he didn't already know. Now, every Christmas morning, my dad still takes a walk. But he takes his phone and he stays close to home,